On the evening of February 22nd, 2022, the city of Green Bay, Wisconsin, would bear witness to a crime so horrifying that it would leave both the local community and the nation in shock. Taylor Schabusiness, a 24-year-old mother struggling with mental illness and drug addiction, would commit a murder so brutal and grotesque that it would forever change the lives of all those involved. The crime, involving the dismemberment of 25-year-old Shad Therian, would become one of the most chilling criminal cases in recent memory, raising profound questions about mental health, drug abuse, and the human capacity for violence. Before delving into the events that unfolded on that fateful night, it is crucial to understand the lives of the key individuals involved. Shad Therian was a kind and gentle young man, known for his love of family and his close relationship with his mother, Taylor Schabusiness. Born and raised in Green Bay, Shad was the youngest of 3 siblings, and while his life had its share of challenges, he was deeply loved by those around him. His family described him as compassionate and caring, someone who could bring a smile to anyone's face. Shad's life, however, would take a tragic turn when he crossed paths with Taylor Schabusiness. Taylor Schabusiness's life had been fraught with struggles from a young age. She had battled drug addiction for years, with methamphetamine playing a particularly destructive role in her life. Those who knew her described a woman who, despite her intelligence, had become consumed by her addiction. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, and she developed a disturbing fascination with dark, violent themes. Social media posts leading up to the murder painted a picture of a person slipping further into instability, exhibiting troubling signs of a mind unmoored from reality. In addition to her addiction, Schabusiness had a documented history of mental health issues, though the extent of her mental illness remained a subject of debate in the aftermath of the crime. Despite the stark differences in their personalities and life circumstances, Shad and Schabusiness had known each other for some time. Their relationship, while not particularly close, was rooted in shared drug use. On the night of February 22nd, the two met with the intention of spending time together, fueled by methamphetamine. What began as a seemingly ordinary night would soon turn into something far more sinister, a night that would end in unspeakable tragedy. As the evening progressed, Schabusiness and Shad engaged in drug-fueled sexual activity. According to Schabusiness's later statements, what started as consensual quickly escalated into violence. Schabusiness strangled Shad with a metal chain, a detail that would later become central to the case. She claimed that the act of strangulation had begun as part of a sexual encounter, but that something within her snapped. Despite Shad's struggles and pleas, Schabusiness continued to tighten the chain around his neck until his life was extinguished. The brutality did not end there. Schabusiness's next actions would shock even the most hardened investigators. After Shad's death, Schabusiness embarked on a grotesque act of dismemberment. Using kitchen knives and other tools found in the house, she methodically cut apart Shad's body, removing his head and placing it in a bucket. Over the course of several hours, Schabusiness mutilated the corpse, carving and dismembering it in ways that defy explanation. According to later reports, she claimed to have intended to take parts of Shad's body with her, but became too lazy to complete the task. Her bizarre and disturbing remarks to police would only deepen the horror of what she had done. In the early hours of February 23rd, Taylor Schabusiness, Shad's mother, became concerned about her son's whereabouts. Shad had been in the basement with Schabusiness, but as time passed and she heard nothing from him, Tara's anxiety grew. Little did she know that what awaited her in that basement would shatter her world forever. Upon descending the stairs, Tara made the horrifying discovery: her son's severed head in a bucket. The shock and devastation she felt are beyond words. Tara immediately contacted the police, her voice trembling as she reported the unthinkable scene she had just witnessed. When the police arrived at the scene, they were greeted by a nightmarish sight. Shad's remains were scattered throughout the basement, his body mutilated in a way that suggested both violence and meticulousness. Investigators later described the scene as one of the most gruesome they had ever encountered. But the true horror of the crime was not just in the physical evidence. It was in Schabusiness's behavior and the chilling detachment with which she spoke about what she had done. Schabusiness was quickly located and apprehended by police. She was found nearby, still wearing blood-soaked clothes, and appeared disturbingly calm. During her arrest, she made several unsettling comments, expressing confusion over why the officers were so shocked by her actions. In a moment that would haunt investigators, she reportedly told them, "I'm surprised you haven't found all of the body parts yet." Her nonchalant demeanor and lack of remorse only added to the deeply unsettling nature of the crime. As the investigation unfolded, the central question on everyone's mind was, why? What could have driven Taylor Schabusiness to commit such a barbaric act? Early theories pointed to her drug use. Methamphetamine, known for its dangerous and mind-altering effects, was believed to have played a significant role in the night's events. But as more details emerged, it became clear that drugs were only part of the story. Schabusiness's history of mental illness, combined with her increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to the murder, suggested a deeper psychological disturbance. Friends and acquaintances recalled her posting disturbing content on social media and speaking openly about violent fantasies. In the weeks leading up to the crime, her mental state seemed to be unraveling, with alarming signs of detachment from reality. As the case moved forward, Schabusiness's defense team sought to portray her as mentally unfit to stand trial. They argued that her actions were the result of drug-induced psychosis and that she lacked the capacity to understand the consequences of her behavior. Schabusiness herself claimed to have blacked out during the murder and dismemberment, though her detailed recollection of the events suggested otherwise. The defense leaned heavily on her history of mental illness, pointing to her long struggle with addiction and untreated psychological issues as evidence that she was not fully responsible for her actions. But the prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that the crime was premeditated, pointing to the calculated nature of the dismemberment and Schabusiness's bizarre statements to police. The prosecution sought to prove that Schabusiness knew exactly what she was doing and that her actions were driven not by mental illness, but by a twisted and sadistic desire for control. They highlighted the chilling calm with which she described the murder, as well as her admission that she had intended to take body parts with her as a trophy. Throughout the trial, the emotional toll on Shad Therian's family was evident. Tara Pakanich, in particular, was deeply affected by the loss of her son and the horrific circumstances of his death. In court, Tara gave a heartbreaking testimony, describing her son's vibrant personality, his close relationship with his family, and the immense pain she felt upon discovering his mutilated body. The grief and trauma experienced by Shad's family were palpable, and every detail of the trial served as a painful reminder of the life that was senselessly taken. As the trial continued, testimonies from law enforcement officers, medical examiners, and forensic experts shed more light on the brutal nature of the crime. The physical evidence, combined with Schabusiness's own statements, painted a clear picture of what had transpired that night. The jury was left to decide whether Schabusiness was mentally fit to stand trial and, ultimately, whether she should be held accountable for her actions. After weeks of emotional testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Taylor Schabusiness was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault. Her sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a punishment that reflected the severity of her crime. For Shad's family, the verdict provided a sense of justice, though it could never fully heal the wounds left by their son's violent death. In the aftermath of the trial, the case continued to draw significant media attention. The details of the crime, the brutal dismemberment, Schabusiness's disturbing behavior, and her lack of remorse captured the public's imagination and sparked widespread discussions about the nature of violence, mental illness, and addiction. Many questioned whether more could have been done to prevent the tragedy. Could better mental health services have intervened before Schabusiness's descent into madness? Could law enforcement have done more to monitor her escalating behavior in the months leading up to the murder? The Taylor Schabusiness case also raised important questions about the role of drugs, particularly methamphetamine, in violent crime. Methamphetamine is known for its destructive effects on the brain, often leading to paranoia, hallucinations, and violent outbursts. In Schabusiness's case, her addiction to methamphetamine undoubtedly played a role in her deteriorating mental state. But as experts pointed out, drug addiction alone could not fully explain the sadistic nature of the crime. Schabusiness's mental illness, combined with her drug use, created a perfect storm of circumstances that led to the tragic events of that night. For the community of Green Bay, the crime left a lasting scar. In a town known for its tight-knit community and relatively low crime rate, the murder of Shad Therian was a shock to the system. Residents who had once felt safe were left grappling with the realization that even in their peaceful town, darkness could strike without warning. The crime became a constant topic of conversation as people struggled to come to terms with the brutality of the act and the implications it had for their community. Beyond the emotional toll on Shad's family and the residents of Green Bay, the case prompted a broader discussion about the state of mental health services in the United States. Many people asked how Taylor Schabusiness, a woman with a well-documented history of mental illness and drug addiction, could have slipped through the cracks. Were there missed opportunities to intervene in her life before her behavior escalated into violence? Could a more proactive approach from mental health professionals or social services have prevented the tragedy? Experts weighed in on the failures of the system, pointing to the lack of accessible and comprehensive mental health care for individuals like Schabusiness. Her case highlighted the inadequacies in treating those with dual diagnoses, people who suffer from both addiction and mental illness. Too often, individuals with co-occurring disorders are shuffled between mental health and substance abuse programs without receiving the integrated care they so desperately need. Schabusiness's untreated mental health issues, compounded by her drug addiction, ultimately set the stage for the horrific events of February 22, 2022. As more details about Schabusiness's background emerged, the public learned that she had faced significant challenges in her life, including a turbulent childhood and early exposure to drugs. Her struggles with addiction began in her teenage years and continued into adulthood, with methamphetamine becoming her drug of choice. Over time, the drug took a severe toll on her mental health, exacerbating her underlying psychological issues. Friends and family members had witnessed her descent into addiction and mental instability, but despite multiple brushes with the law, Schabusiness had never received the comprehensive treatment she needed. In the weeks following the murder, many people called for reforms to the mental health and criminal justice systems, arguing that more should be done to prevent people like Schabusiness from falling through the cracks. Some advocates pushed for increased funding for mental health services, particularly for those struggling with addiction. Others emphasized the need for better coordination between mental health professionals, law enforcement, and the criminal justice system to ensure that individuals like Schabusiness receive the help they need before their behavior escalates into violence. The case also sparked renewed interest in the connection between drug use and violent crime. Methamphetamine, in particular, has long been associated with violent behavior, due in part to the extreme paranoia and aggression it can induce in users. In Schabusiness's case, the drug played a significant role in her deteriorating mental state, leading to the nightmarish events that unfolded in the basement of Schabusiness's home. However, experts cautioned against oversimplifying the case by attributing her actions solely to drug use. While methamphetamine undoubtedly played a role, the crime was the result of a complex interplay of factors, including Schabusiness's untreated mental illness, her history of trauma, and her growing fascination with violence. As the case faded from the headlines, the emotional scars it left behind continued to fester. For Schabusiness's family, the loss was immeasurable. Tara Pakinich, in particular, struggled to cope with the trauma of finding her son's dismembered body. She described the moment as a living nightmare, one that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The grief she experienced was compounded by the horrific nature of the crime. Losing a child is devastating under any circumstances, but to lose a child in such a brutal and senseless way is a wound that may never fully heal. Shad's friends and extended family also grappled with the loss, finding it difficult to move on from the tragedy. Many described Shad as a kind and loving person, someone who had the potential for so much more in life. The thought that his life had been cut short in such a gruesome manner was unbearable. As time passed, the community came together to honor Shad's memory, organizing vigils and memorials to celebrate his life and remind people of the light he brought into the world. The lasting impact of the Taylor Schabusiness case extended beyond Green Bay. Across the country, people followed the trial with a mix of horror and fascination. The media coverage, with its focus on the grisly details of the crime, often sensationalized the case, turning it into something of a spectacle. Headlines emphasized the brutality of the murder and Schabusiness's bizarre behavior, drawing comparisons to infamous cases of serial killers and other high-profile criminals. While the media's coverage brought national attention to the case, it also raised questions about the ethical implications of turning such tragedies into public spectacles. Critics argued that the constant focus on the more lurid aspects of the case overshadowed the human element, the pain and suffering of Shad's family, and the broader issues of mental health and addiction that the case highlighted. For Taylor Schabusiness, life behind bars became her new reality. The life sentence without the possibility of parole ensured that she would never walk free again. In the years to come, Schabusiness would remain a subject of fascination for criminal psychologists and legal experts who continued to analyze her actions and motivations. Was she a cold-blooded killer, fully aware of her actions, or a deeply disturbed woman lost in the throes of mental illness and addiction? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, but one thing is certain: her crime left an indelible mark on everyone it touched. In the broader conversation about criminal justice reform, the Taylor Schabusiness case served as a stark reminder of the importance of early intervention and comprehensive mental health care. Her story highlighted the devastating consequences of neglecting those who struggle with addiction and mental illness, as well as the urgent need for systemic changes to ensure that others do not follow the same path. The case also underscored the challenges of balancing justice with compassion in a legal system that often fails to address the root causes of crime. As the years go by, the case of Taylor Schabusiness and Shad Therian will likely remain a topic of discussion, both for its shocking brutality and for the broader societal issues it illuminated. For Shad's family, the pain of their loss will never fully fade, but they will continue to honor his memory and find solace in the love and support of their community. And for Taylor Schabusiness, her name will forever be associated with one of the most gruesome and disturbing crimes in Wisconsin's history, a case that serves as a tragic reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can arise when mental illness, addiction, and violence intersect. As we reflect on the Taylor Schabusiness case, we are left with many unanswered questions. How could such a tragedy have been prevented? What more could have been done to help Schabusiness before her life spiraled out of control? And most importantly, how can we as a society ensure that others do not suffer the same fate as Shad Therian, a young man whose life was taken in the most horrific way imaginable? These are questions that continue to haunt those who followed the case, and they serve as a call to action for anyone committed to preventing such tragedies in the future. In the end, the Taylor Schabusiness case is a story of loss, grief, and unimaginable violence, but it is also a story of resilience. The resilience of a family determined to honor the memory of their loved one, the resilience of a community coming together in the face of tragedy, and the resilience of a society grappling with difficult questions about mental health, addiction, and justice. Though the pain of the crime will never fully fade, the lessons learned from this case will continue to inform our understanding of the human condition and the steps we must take to prevent future tragedies.